I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. What was supposed to be the happiest weekend of my life turned into a nightmare that still haunts me 6 months later. My name is James, and this is the story of how my fiancée of 3 years, Melissa, destroyed our relationship just hours before we were supposed to say, I do. Melissa and I met during our senior year of college. I was studying finance and she was pursuing a degree in marketing. We bumped into each other at a mutual friend's party, and from that moment, I was captivated by her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. She had this way of lighting up any room she entered, and I couldn't believe my luck when she agreed to go on a date with me. Our relationship progressed naturally. After graduation, we both landed jobs in the same city. I joined a financial consulting firm while she secured a position at a marketing agency. 2 years into our relationship, during a weekend getaway to the mountains, I proposed under a canopy of stars. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she said yes, and we spent the rest of the night planning our future together. We decided on a summer wedding at a beautiful vineyard just outside the city. The planning process was stressful at times, but Melissa handled most of it with grace and enthusiasm. She was determined to make our wedding day perfect, down to the smallest detail. Looking back, I should have noticed how she changed during those months of wedding planning. It started with small things. She became more secretive with her phone, often turning it face down when I entered the room. She began working late more frequently and sometimes came home smelling of cologne that wasn't mine. When I questioned her, she would dismiss my concerns, attributing her behavior to wedding stress and work pressure. Like a fool, I believed her. 3 months before our wedding, Melissa insisted on hiring a professional wedding host, someone who would MC the reception, coordinate with vendors, and ensure everything ran smoothly. She showed me several options, but one name kept coming up in her conversations: Daniel Matthews, a charismatic wedding host who had received rave reviews for his work. He's the best in the business, James, she had said, showing me his website filled with glowing testimonials. Everyone says he makes the wedding reception unforgettable. I was hesitant about the additional expense but wanted to make Melissa happy. We met Daniel for coffee to discuss our vision for the wedding. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded confidence. Throughout our meeting, I noticed how Melissa laughed a little too enthusiastically at his jokes and how her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary. Still, I brushed aside my unease, chalking it up to my own insecurities. We hired Daniel, and from that point, Melissa insisted on handling all communication with him. She explained it made more sense since she was managing most of the wedding details anyway. Again, I didn't question it, trusting her completely. As our wedding weekend approached, the excitement was palpable. Our families arrived from out of town, and we had a wonderful rehearsal dinner at our favorite restaurant. Everything seemed perfect. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, and as per tradition, Melissa and I decided to spend the night before apart. She would stay at the vineyard's bridal suite with her maid of honor, while I remained at our apartment with my best man. That Friday morning, the day before our wedding, I dropped Melissa off at the vineyard. She was ecstatic, buzzing with excitement as she kissed me goodbye. "The next time I see you, I'll be walking down the aisle," she had said, her eyes shining with what I thought was love. I spent most of that day finalizing some last-minute details and picking up my parents from the airport. By late afternoon, I realized I had forgotten to give Melissa the pearl earrings I had bought as her wedding gift, family heirlooms that had belonged to my grandmother. I decided to surprise her by dropping them off at the bridal suite. When I arrived at the vineyard around 6 p.m., everything was quiet. Most of the staff had left for the day, with only a few people remaining to prepare for tomorrow's event. I made my way to the bridal suite, located in a secluded part of the property. I had the key card Melissa had given me just in case, though she had mentioned she would be with her bridesmaids all evening. As I approached the suite, I heard muffled laughter from inside. I smiled, assuming Melissa was with her bridesmaids, probably enjoying some pre-wedding celebration. I was about to knock when I realized I could surprise them all with the gift. I quietly used the key card and opened the door. What I saw next is forever seared into my memory. Melissa was there, but not with her bridesmaids. She was with Daniel, our wedding host. They were in the bedroom area of the suite, both partially undressed. Melissa was wearing just her slip, while Daniel's shirt was unbuttoned. They were so engrossed in each other they didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in shock. I must have made a sound because suddenly they both turned toward me. The look on Melissa's face shifted from passion to horror in an instant. She jumped away from Daniel, frantically pulling her robe around herself. "James, what are you doing here?" she gasped, her voice trembling. I couldn't speak. The small velvet box containing the earrings fell from my hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence of the room. Daniel had the audacity to look embarrassed rather than ashamed. He fumbled with his shirt buttons, muttering something about a misunderstanding and going over last-minute details. Last-minute details. I finally found my voice, though it sounded distant and hollow even to my own ears. "Is this what you've been planning all these months, Melissa?" She started crying, tears smearing her makeup as she approached me with outstretched hands. "James, please, this isn't what it looks like. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." "How long?" I demanded, taking a step back from her. "How long has this been going on?" She couldn't meet my eyes, and that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This had been happening for a while, possibly since we first hired him. Daniel, apparently finding his courage, stepped forward. "Look, man, these things happen, pre-wedding jitters and all that." "It doesn't mean anything." Something snapped inside me. "Doesn't mean anything. I'm supposed to marry her tomorrow, you piece of shit." What followed was a blur. I remember lunging at Daniel, my fist connecting with his jaw. He stumbled backward, knocking over a vase of flowers. Melissa screamed, trying to pull me away from him. Security from the vineyard must have heard the commotion because suddenly there were people in the room, separating us. I stormed out, ignoring Melissa's pleas to stay and talk. My mind was reeling, unable to process the betrayal I had just witnessed. I got into my car and drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up at a bar far from the vineyard. I drank until the bartender cut me off, then called an Uber to take me back to our apartment. The next few hours were the hardest of my life. I had to call off a wedding scheduled to happen in less than 24 hours. I had to inform our families and friends that there would be no ceremony, no celebration. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the real reason, so I simply said there had been an irreconcilable situation. My best man, sensing something was terribly wrong, took charge of contacting the guests while I sat in numbed silence. Melissa called me constantly, leaving tearful voicemails begging for a chance to explain. I ignored them all. Her maid of honor even came to our apartment, trying to convince me that I was overreacting, that pre-wedding hookups were more common than you think, and that I should forgive Melissa. I asked her to leave. The day that should have been our wedding came and went. I spent it in our apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. I had already started moving some of our things to the new house we had purchased together, and wedding gifts that would need to be returned. My parents and closest friends stayed with me, forming a protective barrier against Melissa, who kept trying to see me. A week later, when I had regained some semblance of composure, I agreed to meet Melissa at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. She looked terrible, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor to her skin that suggested she hadn't been eating or sleeping well. A small, vindictive part of me was glad. "I'm so sorry, James," she began as soon as I sat down. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." "How long was it going on?" I asked again, keeping my voice steady. She looked down at her untouched coffee. "Since about 2 months after we hired him." 4 months, I said, the betrayal fresh again. "You've been sleeping with him for 4 months while planning our wedding." She nodded miserably. "It started innocently. We were meeting about wedding details and it got late. We had a few drinks and one thing led to another. And you just couldn't stop after that one time." "I tried," she claimed, tears welling in her eyes. "But he was persistent and I was weak. The stress of the wedding, the excitement of doing something forbidden, I got caught up in it all, but it didn't mean anything, James. It was just physical." "Just physical?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "That makes it so much better." "I love you," she insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away. "What you saw." It was going to be the last time. I had already told Daniel it was over. I laughed without humor. "The last time, the day before our wedding, how considerate of you." She started sobbing then, not caring that other patrons were staring. "Please, James, people make mistakes. We can work through this. We can postpone the wedding, get counseling. I'll do anything to fix this." But as I looked at her, all I could see was her in that bridal suite with Daniel. All I could feel was the shattering of trust that I knew could never be fully repaired. "There's nothing to fix, Melissa. It's over." I left her there, crying in that coffee shop. It was the last time I saw her face to face, though not the last I would hear from her. The aftermath was messy and painful. We had to deal with the financial fallout of a canceled wedding, lost deposits, returned gifts, and the house we had bought together. Mutual friends felt compelled to take sides, and our once vibrant social circle fractured. Daniel, I learned, had a reputation for seducing brides, to be a fact that would have been useful to know before we hired him. Melissa continued her campaign to win me back for months. She sent letters, emails, and messages through friends. She even enlisted her parents to speak to mine, arguing that one mistake shouldn't undo years of love and commitment. But to me, it wasn't just one mistake, it was hundreds of individual choices she had made over 4 months to betray me. 6 months have passed since that day. I've moved to a different city and started a new job. The change of scenery has been healing, allowing me to build a life that doesn't have Melissa at its center. I'm not ready to date yet, but the constant ache in my chest has dulled to an occasional pang. Last month, I received a package from Melissa. Inside was the velvet box with my grandmother's pearl earrings that I had dropped in the bridal suite. Along with it was a letter, her final attempt, she wrote to explain herself. She claimed that the affair with Daniel had made her realize how much she truly loved me, that the thrill of their encounters had been empty compared to the deep connection we shared. I read the letter once, then threw it away along with the earrings. Some betrayals cut too deep for second chances. Some mistakes reveal fundamental truths about a person's character that can't be unseen. I've learned some hard lessons from this experience. I've learned that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. I've learned that love, no matter how strong it seems, can be undermined by selfish choices. And I've learned that sometimes, the person you think you know better than anyone can turn out to be a stranger. As for Melissa, I heard through a mutual friend that she moved back to her hometown. Daniel apparently never had any intention of pursuing a relationship with her beyond their affair. The irony is bitter but unsurprising. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't forgotten those earrings, if I hadn't gone to the bridal suite that evening. Would Melissa have gone through with the wedding? Would she have continued her affair with Daniel afterward, or would she have ended it as she claimed? I'll never know the answers to these questions, and perhaps that's for the best. What I do know is that while the pain of betrayal may fade with time, the lesson it taught me never will. Sometimes the most devastating wounds come from the hands we least expect to hurt us. In a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened. Not for the betrayal itself, but for the revelation it provided before I committed my life to someone capable of such deception. Better to discover the truth before the vows than after, even if the discovery came at the 11th hour. As I write this from my new apartment in a new city, surrounded by new friends who know nothing of my almost wedding, I can finally say I'm beginning to heal. The future I had planned with Melissa is gone, replaced by an unwritten path that, while uncertain, is mine alone to forge. And maybe that's the final lesson in all of this, that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most necessary beginnings. That sometimes what feels like the end of everything is actually just the first page of a different story, one that, in time, might turn out to be better than the one you had originally planned. I don't know what that story holds yet, but for the first time in 6 months, I'm ready to find out. Sitting in my new apartment, staring at the empty Word document on my laptop, I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to write all this down. Perhaps it was therapeutic, a way to externalize the pain I'd been carrying. Or maybe it was a form of closure, acknowledging what happened so I could finally move forward. Whatever the reason, as I typed the last words of my story, a notification popped up on my phone. A text message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. I saw your post on the relationship forum. I went through something similar last year. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the reply button. 6 months ago, I would have ignored it, too raw and wounded to risk any new connections. But now, something had shifted. The weight on my chest had lightened, just enough to allow in a breath of possibility. Thanks, I typed back. I might take you up on that. It was a small step, barely perceptible. But as I set my phone down and closed my laptop, I realized it was the first step I'd taken toward something rather than away from something in a very long time. And for now, that was enough. I later learned that Daniel had done this before. He had a pattern of seducing brides to be during the stressful wedding planning process. He knew exactly when they were most vulnerable, overwhelmed with decisions, anxious about the future, and often feeling neglected by their partners who weren't as involved in the details. A mutual acquaintance in the wedding industry reached out to me after hearing about what happened. She revealed that Daniel had been asked to leave several wedding planning companies due to inappropriate relationships with clients. He had started his own business precisely because no reputable company would hire him anymore. This information didn't lessen the betrayal by Melissa. She had made her choices, regardless of Daniel's manipulation. But it did explain the calculated way he had inserted himself into our lives, the expert manner in which he had isolated Melissa by offering to handle more and more aspects of the wedding planning, necessitating late-night meetings and constant communication. I considered warning others about him, perhaps posting reviews or contacting wedding venues. But ultimately, I decided that remaining entangled in that world, even through warning others, would only keep me tethered to the past. I had to trust that Daniel's reputation would eventually catch up with him without my intervention. 3 more months passed. I had settled into my new life, finding routine and even moments of joy in my fresh start. I had joined a local hiking group, reconnected with a college friend who lived in my new city, and was exceeding expectations at my new job. The sharp pain of betrayal had dulled to an occasional ache, usually triggered by rom-coms or wedding scenes in movies. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, I received a call from Sam, one of the few mutual friends who had remained neutral in the aftermath of our breakup. "You might want to sit down for this," he said after our initial greetings. "What's going on?" I asked, immediately tensing. "It's about Melissa and Daniel," Sam said cautiously. "They're together now, like officially." I felt a momentary tightness in my chest, but it passed quicker than I expected. "Not surprised," I said. "They deserve each other." "That's not all," Sam continued. "They're engaged." This news hit harder than I anticipated. Not because I wanted Melissa back, I didn't, but because it felt like a mockery of what we had planned together. The future she had destroyed with her betrayal was now being recreated with the very person she had betrayed me with. "When's the wedding?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "That's the thing," Sam said, his tone odd. "It was supposed to be next month, but what?" "Daniel was caught with one of his clients last week, a bride whose wedding he was planning. Melissa found out because the bride's fiancé posted about it online and someone tagged her." I closed my eyes, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Vindication, yes, but also an unexpected pang of empathy for Melissa. Now she knew exactly how it felt. "How is she?" I asked, not entirely sure why I cared. Sam sighed. "Not good. She tried to forgive him, said it was karma and she deserved it, but then discovered it wasn't a one-time thing. Apparently he's been doing this with multiple clients throughout their relationship." I wasn't surprised. Leopards don't change their spots, and men who make a habit of seducing engaged women don't suddenly develop moral boundaries. "Thanks for letting me know," I said to Sam, ready to end the conversation. "There's one more thing," he added quickly. "She's been asking about you, wondering how you're doing, if you're seeing anyone." "Tell her I'm fine," I said firmly. "Better than fine, actually, and that's all she needs to know." After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long while, processing this unexpected update to a chapter of my life I had considered closed. There was no satisfaction in hearing about Melissa's pain, no vindictive pleasure in knowing she had received a taste of her own medicine. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: complete indifference. Her problems with Daniel were no longer my concern. Her regrets and her karma were her own to bear, just as my healing had been mine. The emotional tether that had once bound us, even through anger and betrayal, had finally severed completely. That night, I called the person who had reached out to me after reading my story online. We had been texting occasionally over the past 3 months, sharing experiences and gradual steps toward healing. Her name was Rachel, and she had been left at the altar after discovering her fiancé's affair with her cousin. "Want to grab coffee sometime?" I asked, surprising myself with the spontaneity of the invitation. "In person, I mean." "If you're in the area." "I'd like that," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. As I set my phone down, I realized something important. The best revenge against those who betray us isn't hatred or even forgiveness. It's moving forward, creating a life so full and meaningful that when their names eventually come up, they're merely footnotes in your story rather than defining chapters. Melissa and Daniel no longer defined my story. They were just characters in an early chapter, important for the lessons they taught me, but not for the life I was now creating. And that, I discovered, was the truest form of healing.